Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you're here with me today, because there's another story coming up that will literally blow your mind. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss out. And now, let's dive into one of the most shocking criminal cases of recent years. Today, we're going to talk about the tragic fate of Jamie Faith, a case that shook not only the city of Dallas, Texas, but the entire United States. This story has it all: betrayal, manipulation, love that turned into a nightmare, and murder for hire. It's a story that shows you just how far a man can go when driven by greed and recklessness. On October 9, 2029, Jamie Faith, a 47-year-old American Airlines manager, went for a morning walk with his wife, Jennifer, and their dog. It was a perfectly ordinary morning in their quiet Oak Cliff neighborhood. No one would have expected something so terrible to happen in a matter of minutes. Jamie was shot 7 times right outside his house. The attacker disappeared, leaving behind only questions and despair. At first glance, it looked like a random mugging, but as the investigation unfolded, a much darker truth was revealed. This murder was not the work of a stranger or a random criminal. It was the person Jamie trusted most: his own wife, Jennifer Faith. Together with her ex-boyfriend Darren Lopez, she planned the brutal murder of her husband. How did it all begin? What were the motives? And how did they solve the crime? Find out all that and more in today's video. So get your popcorn ready and let's do this. Today, I'd like to introduce you to the man at the center of this tragic story: Jamie Faith. Who was he? What was his life like? And what did people who knew him say about him? Let's take a look at the man behind the headlines. Jamie Faith was a man who built his career through hard work and dedication. He was a manager at American Airlines, one of the largest airlines in the world. It wasn't just any 9-to-5 job. Jamie was respected and valued in his position. His colleagues spoke of him as someone who took his job seriously and always tried to do his best. In the aviation industry, which is extremely competitive and demanding, Jamie built a solid position. He wasn't a man who just rode the wave. He actively contributed to the running of the company, and his work had a real impact. A management position with a company like this requires not only expertise, but also the ability to work under pressure, manage teams, and make important decisions. Jamie had all of these qualities. His career wasn't just about money or a prestigious position. For Jamie, it was more than that. It was part of his identity. He took pride in what he did, and his work ethic was exemplary. Colleagues respected him not only as a boss, but also as a person who could create a pleasant work environment. He never put himself above others, even though he had a managerial position. Jamie was not just a careerist focused solely on work. He had a rich personal life and greatly valued family relationships. He was a man who knew how to balance a demanding job with time at home. His friends described him as someone who had his heart in the right place and would always make time for those he cared about. In the Oak Cliff community where he lived, Jamie was a familiar face. He was not the type of person to isolate himself behind the walls of his home. On the contrary, he was actively involved in the life of the neighborhood. He greeted neighbors, stopped for a brief chat, was simply a pleasant companion. People around him perceived him as a stable, reliable man who could be relied upon. His nature was calm and composed. He was not the confrontational type. If a problem arose, Jamie tried to resolve it in a reasonable way. He had the ability to listen to others and take their opinions into consideration. This made him popular not only with colleagues but also with friends and acquaintances. Jamie loved the simple pleasures of life: walking in the neighborhood, spending time outdoors, taking care of the household. These were all things that fulfilled him. He was not a man who needed grand gestures or luxurious entertainments. He found happiness in everyday moments and being around people he loved. One of the things that says a lot about Jamie was his relationship with animals. Jamie loved dogs, and caring for a pet was an important part of his life. He made time every morning to walk his dog. It was a ritual that helped him start his day off right. These morning walks weren't just about walking the dog. For Jamie, it was a time to relax, to think, to be in the present moment. Walking around the Oak Cliff neighborhood became his routine, something he looked forward to. It was a moment of calm before the workday began, a time when he could just be himself. Neighbors regularly saw him walking the streets with his dog at his side. He always looked relaxed and content. For him, it was not a duty, but a joy. His love for animals was sincere and visible. A dog was not just a pet, it was a member of the family. What says the most about a person is what others say about them. And in Jamie's case, one thing was clear. He was universally liked and respected. There were no reports of any scandals, conflicts, or problematic behavior. Jamie was just a solid guy, as they would say. His colleagues at American Airlines described him as a fair boss. He was not the type of manager to hide behind his position or abuse his power. On the contrary, he was approachable, helpful, and always tried to create an environment where people felt comfortable. In the corporate world, where it is often common to encounter toxic working relationships, Jamie was an exception. His friends knew him as a loyal friend. When someone needed help, Jamie was there. He wasn't the kind of person who would promise mountains and then disappear. If he said something, he meant it. His word carried weight. In his personal life, Jamie was a gentle and caring partner. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't controlling. He wasn't manipulative. All of these characteristics are important to mention because later in the story, there are accusations that are in direct contradiction to who Jamie really was. People who knew Jamie never picked up on any warning signs. He wasn't a man with a dark past or hidden demons. He was a normal man with a stable life, a good job, and a loving family. No one would ever say that he could be dangerous or problematic in any way. Jamie lived a fairly conservative and stable life. He was not an adventurer who took risks or lived on the edge. He was a man who valued certainty, stability, and predictability. He had a routine and it suited him. He got up in the morning, went for a walk, went to work, came home. A simple but happy life. His values were traditional: family, work, loyalty, honesty. He wasn't a man who cheated or lied. At a time when many relationships fall apart because of infidelity or lack of commitment, Jamie was an example of someone who took his commitments seriously. Financially, Jamie was responsible. His position at American Airlines provided him with a decent income, and he handled his money wisely. He wasn't a spendthrift, but he wasn't a miser either. He was able to strike a healthy balance between saving and enjoying life. Jamie was also a man who tried to be better. He wasn't perfect, no one is, but he actively worked on himself and his relationships. He tried to be a good partner, a good colleague, a good neighbor. And in most cases, he succeeded. Oak Cliff wasn't just an address for Jamie. It was his home. The Dallas neighborhood where he lived was a place where he felt safe and comfortable. He invested time in building a life here that fulfills him. He knew his neighbors, he knew the local shops, he knew every corner of his street. For Jamie, home was a place of peace and rest. After a hard day at work, he looked forward to coming home where he could be himself. Home represented safety, love, and comfort. He never imagined that something so terrible would happen right outside his own home, in a place he thought was the safest in the world. This was Jamie Faith, an ordinary man with an extraordinary heart who deserved to live a long and happy life. He was a man who never hurt anyone and tried to make the world around him a better place. And that is why his story is so tragic and his loss so painful. Now we come to the darkest part of this story. Let's talk about the woman who was behind this whole crime, Jennifer Faith. Who was this woman? What drove her to commit such a terrible act? And how was she able to manipulate others into doing what she didn't want to do? Brace yourself, because what you're about to learn may shock you. Jennifer began weaving her web of lies long before the murder. It wasn't a spontaneous decision or a sudden idea. It was a carefully planned and gradually built story to serve as justification for what was about to happen. One of the most despicable aspects of her plan was creating a false image of her husband. Jennifer began systematically sending out emails claiming to be a victim of domestic violence. She wrote that Jamie was physically abusing her, that she lived in constant fear, that her life was a nightmare. These emails were not directed at random people. She targeted them very strategically at a person she knew would be inclined to believe her every word. In these emails, she described alleged incidents of violence in horrifying detail. She described how Jamie allegedly hit her, how he humiliated her, how he controlled her. She painted a picture of an abusive husband who made her life unbearable. Each email was carefully crafted to evoke sympathy, anger, and protective instincts in the recipient. Jennifer was not a stupid woman. She knew exactly what words to use, how to evoke emotion, how to present herself as a helpless victim with nowhere to go and no one to help her. Her writing was manipulative on a professional level. They weren't just simple sentences. They were carefully constructed stories full of emotion, detail, and conviction. What made these emails even worse was that everything was a lie. Every word, every accusation, every alleged incident. All fabricated. Jennifer was not a victim of domestic violence. She was living with a man who loved her, respected her, and would never hurt her. But she didn't care about the truth. All she cared about was the goals she had set for herself. But Jennifer knew that words alone might not be enough. Nowadays, people want proof. They want something tangible. So she went even further. She started creating fake visual evidence of her alleged abuse. She sent photos showing bruises, scratches, and other injuries. These photos were meant to serve as evidence of what she described in the emails. They were to be the ultimate evidence that would convince anyone who had doubts. After all, who would lie about something like that and have photographs to boot? But the truth was very different. These photos were either old pictures from a car accident Jennifer had been in, or they had been downloaded from the internet. None of these injuries were caused by Jamie. Some of the photos weren't even hers. She simply found pictures of abused women on the internet and passed them off as her own. This level of manipulation shows just how far Jennifer was willing to go. Not only did she lie with her words, but she actively created false evidence. She knew that visual material has a much greater impact than mere text. Photographs evoke emotion. They evoke a visceral response. When someone sees a bruise or a bleeding wound, they automatically feel sympathy and anger. Jennifer used the psychology of manipulation to a masterful level. The combination of emotional narrative and visual evidence created an almost bulletproof story. Who would doubt a woman who not only describes her abuse, but also shows photographs of her injuries? What is perhaps most frightening about this is the coldness with which she did it. This was not a desperate woman trying to escape a dangerous situation. She was a manipulator who deliberately and purposefully destroyed the reputation of an innocent person to achieve her goals. Every photo, every email was another nail in the coffin of Jamie's reputation. Now we get to the heart of the matter. Why was Jennifer doing all this? What drove her to such extreme measures? The answer, unfortunately, is both banal and terrifying. Money. Jennifer didn't just want Jamie out of her life. She wanted his property, his money, his life insurance. A divorce would mean property division, maybe alimony, definitely legal battles. But if Jamie died, that would be much easier and much more profitable. Jamie had a solid position with American Airlines, which meant a decent income and probably some savings. They had assets in common, a house, a car, maybe investments. And then there was life insurance. Jennifer knew that as a widow she would inherit everything. No division, no complications, no lawyers. Everything would be hers. Greed is one of the oldest and strongest motives for crime. Jennifer was no exception. Maybe she was living beyond her means. Maybe she was in debt. Maybe she just wanted more than what she had. Whatever the specific reason, money was the clear driver of her actions. What's interesting is how she was able to rationalize her plan. Most people would never be able to cross the moral line that separates thought from actual action. But Jennifer crossed that line without hesitation. For her, it wasn't a moral problem. It was a practical problem with a practical solution. Financial motives also explain the timing of the whole plan. Jennifer didn't wait for things to work themselves out. She actively worked to create a situation that would bring her maximum financial benefit. Every step was calculated. Every lie had a purpose. In addition to the direct financial benefits of Jamie's death, Jennifer probably had other plans. Perhaps she envisioned a new life where she would have all the money for herself. Maybe she was planning what she would buy with the money, where she would go, how she would live. For her, it wasn't a crime. It was an investment in her future. Jennifer was not just a liar and a cheat. She was a master of psychological manipulation. The way she could control other people was almost artistic in its complexity. Her main weapon was empathy, or rather the abuse of it. Jennifer knew perfectly how to make other people feel that they had to protect her. She presented herself as a helpless victim with nowhere to go and no one to help her. This victim role was carefully constructed and maintained. She used a technique of gradual retraction. She didn't start out demanding murder. First she built trust, then she escalated her stories, then slowly suggested that she needed help, and only then did she come up with a concrete plan. Each step was small. Each step seemed logical in the context of the one before. Jennifer also made perfect use of emotional blackmail. If anyone started to doubt or hesitate, she immediately switched to desperation mode. She described how awful her life was, how she had no other choice, how no one else understood her. She created the feeling that if someone didn't help her, it would be their fault if something happened to her. Another of her tactics was to create an illusion of intimacy and specialness. She made it appear that the person she was communicating with was the only one who understood her, the only one she could trust, the only one who could see the truth. This creation of a sense of specialness is a classic manipulative technique that works surprisingly well. Jennifer also used positive reinforcement. When someone did what she wanted, she immediately showered them with praise, gratitude, and affirmation. She created an addictive cycle. Do what I want, get positive feedback, feel good, do it again. Her communication style was carefully tailored to the person she was manipulating. She studied other people's weaknesses and knew exactly which strings to play. If someone had a problem with their self-worth, she emphasized how important and needed they were. If someone had protective instincts, she emphasized their vulnerability. What made Jennifer so dangerous was her ability to live a double life. Outwardly, she was a loving wife, a caring partner, a normal woman living a normal life. No one around her knew what was going on behind closed doors. This ability to mask her true intentions required incredible self-control and cold-bloodedness. Jennifer was able to sit at the table with Jamie, smile at him, carry on a normal conversation, while at the same time planning his death. This level of dissociation between external behavior and internal intentions is characteristic of a sociopathic personality. Jennifer also maintained normal social relationships. She talked to neighbors, went to work, and attended social events. No one would ever know that something so dark was going on beneath the surface. This ability to maintain a facade of normality is key to successful long-term manipulation. Her plan required patience and discipline. She could not act rashly or emotionally. She had to stay in character, play the game, wait for the right moment. And that's exactly what she did, with frightening precision and calm. Jennifer Faith was no simple criminal. She was a sophisticated manipulator who exploited the psychological weaknesses of others to achieve her goals. Her ability to lie, cheat, and manipulate was on a level that is rare even among criminals. And that's what makes her such a fascinating and terrifying character in this story. Darren Lopez was no random stranger picked out of the phone book. He was a man with a personal history that connected him to a key character in the story. Their knowledge of each other went deep into the past, back to a time when they were both younger and their lives looked very different. In his youth, Lopez lived through a period that was arguably one of the happiest of his life. It was a time of hopes, dreams, and romantic relationships. He met a person with whom he shared intimate moments, with whom he planned for the future, with whom he built an emotional bond that would follow him for the rest of his life. This relationship was not just a superficial acquaintance. It was something deeper, probably a first love, an intense connection that shaped his concept of romance and relationships. When a person is young, such relationships sink deep into the soul. They become the benchmark for all future relationships, the gold standard of what love can be. But as is often the case with young romances, their paths diverged. Perhaps it was because of distance, perhaps because of different life goals, perhaps simply because they were too young to sustain something so intense. Whatever the reason, their lives went in different directions. For Lopez, the parting probably wasn't easy. When you lose someone you truly loved, it leaves a scar. Maybe he's been wondering what if for years. Maybe he imagined what their lives would have been like if they'd stayed together. Maybe that person haunted his dreams and memories, long after their paths parted. The years passed and their lives evolved independently. Each built their own existence, their own relationships, their own problems. But somewhere deep in Lopez's heart, there remained a place reserved for the person from his youth. This emotional bond, though seemingly inactive, remained strong, waiting for an opportunity to reassert itself. Lopez's journey took him into the U.S. Army, a decision that would shape the rest of his life in ways he could not have imagined at the time. Military service isn't just a job. It's a transformative experience that changes the way a person sees the world, themselves, and their place in society. During basic training, Lopez went through a process designed to deconstruct his civilian identity and rebuild it according to military standards. He learned to follow orders without question, to function as part of a unit, to suppress individual needs in favor of the mission. These lessons were hammered into him through endless hours of drill, physical training, and psychological conditioning. Military training taught him how to handle weapons, not just how to use them, but how to maintain them, how to handle them under pressure, how to treat them as tools of the job rather than objects of fear. This familiarity with weapons became second nature, an instinctive ability that he never completely lost even after returning to civilian life. The Army also taught him tactical thinking, how to plan operations, how to assess risks, how to move stealthily, how to achieve objectives efficiently and with minimal detection. These skills were designed to protect his country and fellow soldiers, but the same principles could be applied to other situations. Psychologically, military service prepared him for violence in a way that most civilians will never experience. He learned to suppress his natural inhibitions against hurting others. In the context of war, this is essential. Soldiers must be able to act quickly and decisively, without being paralyzed by moral hesitation. But these psychological adaptations have had long-term consequences. The brotherhood between soldiers is intense and unique. Lopez formed bonds with men with whom he shared danger, fear, and triumph. He learned that loyalty to the unit is sacred, that you drop everything else and help your brother private, regardless of the personal cost. This lesson about absolute loyalty later proved problematic in a civilian context. Lopez's service took him into combat zones where theoretical military training became a brutal reality. He saw things that most people can't even imagine: death, destruction, the inhumanity of war at its most raw. These experiences left a lasting mark on his psyche. In combat situations, he learned to live with constant stress. Every day could be his last. Every sound could signal danger. Every decision could mean the difference between life and death. This hypervigilance, constantly scanning the environment for potential threats, became automatic, even when it was no longer needed. He had seen friends die. Maybe he held a dying friend in his arms. Maybe he had to continue the mission even though he had lost a loved one. These experiences create a kind of pain that is hard to describe to those who have not experienced it. It is a combination of grief, survivor's guilt, and deep existential questions about the meaning of life and death. He may have been forced to do things that were necessary for survival, but that were contrary to his basic moral values. In war, the lines between right and wrong are often blurred. Decisions you have to make in a split second can haunt you for the rest of your life. Returning from the combat zone to normal life is extremely difficult. Civilian concerns seem trivial after you have faced life and death issues. Relationships seem superficial. People complain about problems that seem trivial to you. This alienation from civilian society is common among war veterans. Sleep has become a problem. Nightmares, flashbacks, the inability to turn off the hypervigilant state of mind. All these symptoms interfered with his rest. Without quality sleep, all other aspects of his mental health were deteriorating. After years of separation, there came a moment when Lopez reconnected with a person from his past. This reconnection was not accidental. It was a carefully timed and strategic outreach that exploited his emotional vulnerability at a time when he was most susceptible to manipulation. The initial contact was probably innocent. Perhaps it was a social media message, an email, or even a phone call. The tone was nostalgic, friendly, full of memories of better times. "Remember when I think of you often. I'd like to know how you're doing." These phrases are designed to elicit an emotional response, to open the door to deeper communication. For Lopez, who struggled with isolation and mental health issues, this contact was a lifeline. Finally, someone from his past, someone who knew him before he became who he became. Someone who remembered him as a young, promising man with a future ahead of him, not a traumatized veteran with problems. The communication gradually intensified. Daily messages became common, then several times a day, then almost constant. This escalation was gradual, so that Lopez didn't even realize how dependent on this communication he had become. It became a bright spot in his otherwise dark days. The conversations gradually became more intimate. They shared memories, dreams, fears. Lopez opened up about his problems, the nightmares, the feelings of alienation, the inability to find his place in the civilian world. This vulnerability was exactly what the other side needed, a way to get under his skin, to influence him. Gradually, the conversations began to revolve around the other side's current problems. First, it was small grievances, then bigger problems, then crisis situations. Lopez, with his military-learned loyalty and protective instincts, naturally wanted to help. He was a hero, a protector. That was his identity, his purpose. Once the connection was re-established, a sophisticated process of manipulation began. Lopez wasn't just a random target. He was carefully selected for his specific vulnerabilities and abilities. The manipulator understood his psychology better than he did. Using his protective instincts was key. Lopez was trained to protect those who could not protect themselves. When told that someone he loved was in danger, his first instinct was to act, not question. This quick reaction to a perceived threat was exactly what the manipulator was counting on. His military loyalty was also exploited. In the military, he learned that when your brother calls for help, you don't ask questions, you just act. This unconditional loyalty, which was a virtue in a military context, became a weakness in the civilian world where people can abuse your trust. The manipulator used a technique of gradual retraction. He didn't start right away with a demand for something extreme. First, there were small requests. Can you help me with something? Can you do something for me? Each request fulfilled set a precedent, a pattern of behavior that was harder to break with each successive request. The emotional blackmail was constant. If you really love me, no one else can help me. You're the only one I can trust. These phrases were designed to create a sense of specialness and responsibility. Lopez felt like the only person who could save the situation. Isolation from others was also part of the strategy. The manipulator tried to become Lopez's main source of emotional support and connection. Other relationships were challenged or undermined. No one else understands us. People would condemn us if they knew. This isolation made him even more dependent on the manipulator. The transition from innocent communication to discussion of violence was not sudden. It was a gradual process, where each step seemed logical in the context of the one before. The manipulator carefully constructed a narrative that justified increasingly extreme measures. At first, there were only complaints about a third party. How bad the person was, how hurtful, how dangerous. These stories were designed to provoke anger and protective instincts. Lopez learned to see this third person as an enemy, as a threat to someone he loved. Gradually, the stories became more dramatic. It wasn't just emotional pain, it was physical danger. It wasn't just occasional trouble, it was a constant threat. Each story added another layer of urgency, another reason to act. Discussions about possible solutions began innocently. I wish he would just go away. It would be better if he wasn't a problem anymore. These comments tested Lopez's reaction, gauging his willingness to consider drastic measures. When Lopez didn't protest these suggestions, the handler considered it a green light to proceed. The discussions became more concrete. What if maybe we could, do you know any way to? Each question drew him deeper into the plot. Lopez's military skills were specifically mentioned and appreciated. You know how to do these things. With your training, it would be easy. No one else has your skills. This praise of his skills convinced him that he was not only capable, but obligated to act. The final decision was not made in an instant. It was the result of weeks or months of psychological conditioning, where Lopez's moral boundaries were gradually eroded. When he finally agreed, he probably didn't even feel he was doing anything radically different from what he had long been directed to do. The manipulator applied time pressure to the final conviction. We must act now. We can't wait any longer. This is our only opportunity. This sense of urgency prevented Lopez from having time to fully consider the consequences of his actions. His unique position and abilities were emphasized. Only you can do this. Without you, it's impossible. You are our only hope. This put him in the position of a hero, a savior, someone who makes difficult but necessary decisions. Moral justification was provided. It's self-defense. You're protecting an innocent man. It's justice. These rationalizations helped Lopez overcome his natural moral inhibitions against murder. Practical details were discussed in a way that made them less frightening. There was no talk of murder. There was talk of solving the problem. There was no talk of killing. There was talk of removing the threat. This euphemistic language helped to psychologically distance the act from its true nature. Lopez's consent was probably given gradually, not all at once. First, he agreed to the principle. then to the planning, then to the preparations, and finally to the execution. Each step seemed a small progression from the one before, so that he never had to face the full weight of what he was committing himself to. When he finally said yes, he probably felt like someone making a difficult but necessary decision. His manipulated mind told him he was a hero, a protector, someone who had the courage to do what others could not. The reality that he was being manipulated into committing murder was buried under layers of psychological conditioning and emotional blackmail. Darren Lopez was not a monster. He was a vulnerable human being who was systematically manipulated and abused. His story is a tragic reminder of how our greatest virtues, loyalty, protective instincts, love, can be exploited by those who have no conscience. It is a lesson in the importance of having support systems, critical thinking, and the ability to recognize manipulation before it is too late. Now we come to the hardest part of this story, the actual day it all happened. Brace yourselves, because the details of what happened that morning are truly horrific. Let's go through the events step by step. It was early in the morning, and the Oak Cliff neighborhood was slowly waking up to a new day. The sun was beginning to rise, the birds were singing, and most people were still sleeping or getting ready for their normal workday. There was no indication that anything so terrible was going to happen in a few minutes. The atmosphere in Faith's house was seemingly calm and normal. No one would have known that a tragedy was about to happen. The house looked like every other house in the neighborhood. A tidy, quiet neighborhood, a place where one would expect safety and peace. People in this neighborhood were used to quiet mornings when the biggest disturbance was the sound of passing cars or barking dogs. The temperature was pleasant, typical of an October morning in Texas. It wasn't hot yet, but it was no longer a cool night. Perfect weather for a morning walk. The streets were still relatively empty, with only the occasional car driving by or walking on the sidewalk. It was a time when most people weren't out yet, which was important for what was coming up. Inside the house, people were getting ready for the day as usual. Coffee was brewing, maybe the radio or TV was on with the morning news. Everything seemed perfectly normal, routine, predictable. No one knew that this day would go down in the history of the neighborhood as one of the most tragic. The dog that was part of the household was probably already awake and anxious. Dogs have an internal routine, and they know when it's time for a walk. He may have been running around his owners, wagging his tail, waiting for that moment when someone would take the leash and take him outside. The decision to go for a walk was made like any other morning. There was nothing special or unusual about it. The leash was attached to the dog's collar. Maybe someone took the house keys, maybe a jacket or sweater. Just normal preparations for a normal morning walk. The door opened, and the small group walked out into the crisp morning. The air was clear, the neighborhood quiet. It was like 1,000 times before, just another day, another walk. The dog was probably excited, pulling on the leash, sniffing every tree and bush. Normal behavior, normal morning. The route of the walk was probably the same as always. Humans are creatures of habit, and when they find a route that suits them, they stick to it. Same streets, same corners, same places where the dog takes breaks. This predictability, which normally brings a sense of security and routine, became a death trap this time. As the group walked through the streets, they may have said hello to a neighbor. Maybe they noticed a car parked on the street. Maybe a dog barked at a cat or a squirrel. All perfectly normal things that happen on any walk. No one paid attention to anything unusual, because there was nothing unusual, or so it seemed. After the walk, the group walked back home. Maybe they were tired, maybe they were looking forward to breakfast and the start of the day. The house was in sight. Safety was at hand. A few more steps and they would be inside, behind closed doors, in the safety of their home. But then everything changed in an instant. A figure appeared out of nowhere. A man who shouldn't have been there, someone who was waiting there, hidden, ready. A masked assailant whose identity was not immediately recognizable. Face obscured, figure shrouded, a complete stranger in what should have been a safe neighborhood. Imagine the moment of terror. 1 second you're on a routine walk. The next second you're facing a masked assailant. No time to think, no time to react, no time to run. Everything is happening so fast that your brain can't process what's actually happening. The attacker was neither indecisive nor hesitant. He came with a clear intent and executed it with brutal efficiency. He held a weapon in his hand, cold, heavy, deadly. This was not a robbery attempt. This was not a random attack. It was clear that the assailant had a specific target. And then the worst began. Shots rang out. Not 1, not 2, but 7. 7 shots that shattered the silence of the morning calm. 7 shots that changed everything. Each shot was loud, deafening, terrifying. A sound that woke the neighbors, that caused panic, that meant the end of life. The shots hit different parts of the body. The head, the deadliest place where a hit almost always means instant death or very serious injury. The brain, the center of all that we are, destroyed in an instant. The chest, hitting vital organs like the heart or lungs. Every breath becomes a struggle, every heartbeat pumping blood out of the body instead of keeping it in. And then the groin, the area where the major arteries pass through. Hitting this area means massive bleeding that's almost impossible to stop. Blood gushes out with every heartbeat, staining the pavement, creating a pool that spills into the concrete. The attack lasted only a few seconds, but for those who experienced it, it must have felt like an eternity. Pain, shock, disbelief, all these emotions at once. The body falls to the ground, the strength fades, the world begins to blur. These are the last moments of a life spent in agony and confusion. The dog was probably barking, panicking, trying to protect its owner. Animals sense danger and react instinctively. Maybe he was trying to attack his attacker. Maybe he just backed away in fright. The leash may still be held by a hand that will soon lose all its strength. The sound of gunshots immediately attracted attention. In a quiet residential neighborhood, gunshots are something completely unusual and frightening. People in the houses around jumped out of bed, ran to the windows trying to find out what was going on. Neighbors who were close enough saw a scene that is forever etched in their memories. A man lying on the ground in a pool of blood. A masked assailant. Chaos and confusion. This is not something you expect to see in your neighborhood, in front of your neighbor's house. Someone called 911 immediately. With shaking fingers, they dialed a number trying to describe what they were seeing, where it was, how quickly they needed help. Dispatchers on the other end of the line tried to calm the callers while dispatching units to the scene. Other neighbors ran outside, instinctively wanting to help. But what can you do in a situation like this? Someone tried first aid, pressed their hands on the wounds, tried to stop the bleeding. But with 7 gunshot wounds, some of which hit vital organs, the chances of survival are minimal. The atmosphere was utter chaos. People screaming, a dog barking, someone crying. Blood was everywhere, on the pavement, on the grass, on the hands of those who tried to help. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the morning air. Time seemed to stand still and at the same time to be going too fast. While all this was going on, the attacker did not stay put. He had done what he came to do, and now it was time to disappear. He turned and began to run, quickly, decisively. Every second on the scene meant a greater risk of being caught. He ran to the vehicle he had prepared. It wasn't parked right next to the crime scene, but close enough that he could run to it quickly. The car was his escape route, his way out of this place before the police arrived. He got in the car and started the engine. Dark vehicle. Nissan make. Nothing that particularly stood out. The kind of car you see on the street every day. But there was something about this particular car that made it stand out. Some sticker or emblem. Something distinctive that would later help investigators. The car left the scene quickly, but not fast enough to attract attention. The attacker knew he had to look normal, had to blend into the morning traffic. Driving too fast would attract attention. Driving too slow would risk being pulled over or remembered. He drove through the streets of Oak Cliff, taking each turn away from the scene. His heart was probably pounding, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He'd just committed murder. He had just taken a human life. This is not something you do without consequences to your own psyche, no matter how much you've prepared for it. What the assailant may not have known, or given enough thought to, was the presence of security cameras in the area. Nowadays, many homes in residential neighborhoods have some sort of security system. Cameras on doors, cameras on garages, cameras focused on the street. One of these cameras captured something extremely important. It may not have been video of the murder itself, but it captured a vehicle. A dark Nissan driving through the area at the time of the murder. That in itself might not mean much, because cars drive through the streets all the time. But the timing was suspicious. The quality of the footage may not have been perfect. Security cameras often don't have high resolution, especially the older models. But it was enough to identify the type of vehicle, its color, and most importantly, that distinctive sticker. That sticker became a key identifying feature. It wasn't just some common marking that thousands of people have. It was something specific, something that made this particular vehicle unique. Maybe it was a sticker supporting an organization, maybe a symbol or a slogan. Whatever it was distinctive enough for the cameras to pick it up. Investigators later spent hours reviewing this footage, pausing it, replaying it, trying to capture every detail. Every pixel could mean the difference between solving a case and a cold trail. And this particular footage turned out to be a goldmine of information. When the assailant disappeared, it left a place of horror. The sidewalk in front of the house, which minutes before had been clean and innocent, was now a crime scene. Blood covered the concrete, creating patterns that told a story of violence.
The body lay where it had fallen. A life had escaped in minutes, perhaps even faster. 7 gunshot wounds are almost always fatal, especially when they hit critical areas. There was nothing to do. Help was too late. Death was instantaneous or very quick. Neighbors gathered around the body, still in shock at what they had just seen. Some wept, others stood in mute amazement. This wasn't supposed to happen in their neighborhood, not to their neighbor, not like this. Death is part of life, but a violent death, a murder right outside your door, that's something else entirely. Sirens could be heard in the distance. The police and emergency services were on their way, but everyone knew it was too late. They're not going to save a life. They're going to document a death. They're going to start a murder investigation. The dog that witnessed the whole thing was probably traumatized. Animals don't understand death the way humans do, but they feel loss. They feel that something terrible has happened. Maybe he was still standing by his owner's body, refusing to leave, not knowing what to do. The morning sun continued its rise, indifferent to the tragedy that had taken place. The birds still sang. The world went on spinning. But for the people in this neighborhood, for the family and friends of the victim, the world had just stopped making sense. Nothing will ever be the same again.
As detectives began to search the digital trail, a whole new world of evidence opened up. Mobile phones are now like the black boxes of our lives, recording our every move, every message, every call. And it's these records that have become the key to cracking the case. Investigators obtained court orders to examine the phone records of everyone involved. It's not an easy process. You have to convince a judge that there's a legitimate reason for the invasion of privacy. But in a murder case, judges are usually willing to grant such orders. When they started going through the data, they discovered something fascinating. A huge amount of communication between two particular phones. It wasn't just a few messages back and forth. It was thousands of text messages, hundreds of calls, endless hours of communication. This volume of contact was suspicious in itself. But it wasn't just the quantity. It was also the content. The messages were intimate, planning, coordinating. Investigators found messages that discussed timing, movements, opportunities. They found messages that hinted at something much darker than innocent conversation between old acquaintances. Forensic experts also analyzed the metadata of these messages. The metadata tells you when the message was sent, where it was sent from, how long it took to arrive. This seemingly innocent data can create a timeline of events that is incredibly accurate. They also discovered that some messages were deleted. But here comes the beauty of modern forensic technology. Deleted doesn't mean gone.
Mobile phone data can be recovered even if the user thought they had deleted it forever. Investigators used specialized software to reconstruct these deleted messages. What they found in these recovered messages was astonishing. Explicit discussions of the plan, the motives, how to do it, and how to avoid it. There were messages that could serve as a textbook example of a conspiracy to murder. Each report was another nail in the coffin of the defense. Investigators also tracked the movement of phones using cell tower data. Each phone communicates with the nearest cell towers, and these interactions leave a record. Using triangulation from multiple towers, it can be determined fairly accurately where a phone was at a particular time. This location data showed something interesting. One of the phones was moving from a very remote location towards Dallas at the exact time leading up to the murder. It wasn't a random trip. It was a direct path, a purposeful path, a path with a clear destination. And then, immediately after the murder, the same phone started moving back, just as purposeful, just as direct. Money leaves a trail. That's something every criminal should know, but many forget or hope no one finds out. In this case, financial records proved to be another key piece of the puzzle. Detectives gained access to all the suspects' bank accounts and credit cards. They started looking for unusual transactions, large cash withdrawals, purchases that could be linked to the crime. And they found a lot. They discovered a series of money transfers between accounts. They weren't small amounts, thousands of dollars sent at regular intervals. These transfers began weeks before the murder and continued until the murder. The pattern was clear. Someone was paying someone else for something. And in the context of the murder, it was easy to guess what for. But it wasn't just direct bank transfers. Investigators also found gift card purchases. Gift cards are a popular tool for those trying to hide financial transactions because they're harder to track than direct transfers. But they still leave a trail. Someone has to buy the card and someone has to use it. Records showed purchases of these cards at specific stores at specific times. The security cameras at these stores then provided video evidence of who was buying these cards. Each transaction was further evidence. Each purchase further confirmation of what was actually happening. Detectives also found spending on items that were directly related to the crime. Gasoline purchases at specific gas stations along the route between the two cities. Food purchases at fast food restaurants near Dallas.
Each of these transactions had a timestamp that matched the timeline of the crime. Perhaps most importantly, they also found transactions that showed a lifestyle beyond the ordinary. Luxurious shopping, expensive dinners, expenses that made no sense in relation to the declared income. Where was this money coming from?
The answer was obvious when put in context with the other evidence. Forensic accountants, specialists in tracking cash flow, created a detailed map of all the financial transactions. This map showed a clear pattern: money flowing in one direction with a clear purpose. It wasn't loans between friends. It wasn't gifts. It was payment for a service, for a very specific and very illegal service. Let's go back to the dark Nissan that was caught on the security camera. Investigators knew that finding this vehicle was critical to solving the case. But how do you find one particular car in a city full of cars? The answer was that distinctive sticker. Detectives zoomed in on the camera, increased the contrast, used every tool available to enhance the image. Gradually, the sticker became more legible, more recognizable. It wasn't just an abstract blob. It was a concrete sticker with a concrete meaning. The sticker was unusual. It wasn't an ordinary sticker supporting a sports team or a political candidate. It was something more specific, something that only a limited number of people would have. This narrowed the field of possible suspects considerably. Investigators began searching vehicle registration databases. They were looking for any dark Nissans registered in the relevant areas. It was a lengthy process. Thousands of vehicles matched the basic description. But when they added sticker specifics to the search, the list narrowed dramatically. At the same time, detectives contacted an organization or group associated with the sticker. They asked who might have the sticker, who they distributed it to, if they had any records. This line of investigation provided additional leads and helped narrow the list of suspects even further. Then came the breakthrough. One of the detectives found a match, a specific vehicle registered to a specific person who had a known connection to one of the parties involved. It wasn't a random car. It wasn't some random criminal's car. It was the car of someone with motive, opportunity, and connections. Investigators began tracking this vehicle. They didn't want to arrest the suspect too soon. They needed to gather more evidence. They needed to be absolutely sure. So they watched, they observed, they documented. Every trip, every stop, every movement was recorded. During this surveillance, they found more evidence. They saw a vehicle parked in locations that corresponded to financial transactions. They saw encounters between suspects. They saw patterns of behavior that confirmed their theory of what happened and why. As the police began to question people connected to the case, inconsistencies began to emerge. The first accounts seemed consistent, but as detectives dug deeper, cracks in the stories began to appear. One key person gave a statement about his movements on the day of the murder. She claimed she was in a certain place at a certain time, doing certain things. But when detectives checked those claims against digital evidence, location data from the phone, credit card transactions, security camera footage, things didn't add up. For example, the claim that she had been home all morning was contradicted by cell phone data that showed the phone moving around town. The claim that she didn't call a specific person was refuted by call logs that clearly showed multiple calls at that exact time. Detectives used a classic investigative technique, having the suspect tell her story several times. Each time, they noted small differences, small changes in details. An innocent man usually tells the same story every time because he's telling the truth. The liar has trouble keeping all the details consistent. During one interrogation, a detective asked a seemingly innocent question about something the suspect hadn't mentioned before. The reaction was revealing. A moment of hesitation, visible nervousness, an attempt to avoid a direct answer. Experienced investigators recognized these signals immediately. Another inconsistency appeared in the description of human relationships. Someone claimed that he did not communicate regularly with a certain person, that they had not seen each other for months. But phone records showed daily communication, hundreds of messages, long calls. Why would someone lie about something like that if they had nothing to hide? Investigators also confronted the suspects with physical evidence. They showed surveillance photos, printed out phone records, produced financial transactions. They watched the reactions, denials, justifications, attempts to explain the unexplainable. One of the most effective techniques was to ask questions to which the detectives already knew the answers. If a suspect lied about something that investigators could easily verify, it cast doubt on everything else he said. Each lie was another crack in their story. As the investigation progressed, detectives increased the pressure on the suspects. It's not just about gathering evidence. It's also about a psychological game, creating a situation where criminals feel increasingly trapped. Investigators began conducting searches. They came up with warrants, searched houses, seized computers, phones, documents. This type of invasion of privacy is extremely stressful and aims to undermine the suspect's sense of security. During these searches, they found more evidence. Maybe notes, maybe crime-related items, maybe other electronic devices with compromising data. Each find was another piece of the puzzle, another piece of evidence of what really happened. Detectives were also using isolation tactics. They questioned various suspects separately, suggesting that others were already cooperating, already providing information, already making deals. This uncertainty about what others are saying can lead people to start talking to protect themselves. The psychological pressure was intense. The suspects knew that the evidence was piling up, that the circle was tightening. Sleep becomes difficult when you know the police are building a case against you. Every knock on the door, every phone call could be another step towards arrest. Investigators also observed the suspect's behavior after the murder. They checked social media, talked to neighbors and friends, looked for signs of guilt or nervousness. Sometimes criminals give themselves away with their behavior, changes in routine, increased paranoia, attempts to get rid of evidence. Forensic psychologists analyzed the communication patterns in the seized messages. They looked for changes in tone, frequency of communication, word choice. This analysis can reveal the emotional state of people at different stages of planning and carrying out a crime. In the end, the combination of all this evidence, digital, financial, physical, and testimonial, painted an undeniable picture of what happened. It was not based on any one piece of evidence that could be disputed. It was a mountain of evidence, each confirming the others, each pointing to the same conclusion. The investigation showed that in modern times it is almost impossible to commit a perfect crime. The digital footprints we leave, the financial transactions we make, the cameras that record us, it all creates a web of evidence that is almost impossible to erase completely. And in this case, that's exactly what brought justice to its goal. In February 2021, a moment came that investigators had been working towards for months. The prosecutor gathered all the evidence, reviewed every detail, and decided to file formal charges. This is not a decision that is made lightly. You have to be convinced that you have a strong enough case to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. The charge was serious: murder for hire. This is one of the most serious categories of murder in the American legal system. It's not murder in the heat of passion. It's not an accident. It's not self-defense. It's a premeditated, prepaid murder.
The penalties for this type of crime are extreme, often involving life in prison or even the death penalty in some states. The day of the arrest was dramatic. Federal agents and local police arrived with a warrant. This was not a silent arrest. It was a coordinated, professional one, with full knowledge of the gravity of the situation. Warrants were read, handcuffs were put on, and the suspect was led away. Media coverage was immediate and intense. Reporters gathered outside the house, outside the police station, outside the courthouse. This case had all the elements that attract media attention: murder, betrayal, money, manipulation. The cameras captured every moment. Being led away in handcuffs, arriving at the court, the first appearance before the judge. The first hearing was formal but tense. The judge read the charges, explained the defendant's rights, set bail conditions. In murder cases, bail is often denied or set at an astronomical amount. The court must weigh the risk of flight and danger to the public. The defense immediately began working on a strategy. They hired lawyers, began reviewing the evidence, and looked for weaknesses in the prosecutor's case. In the American legal system, everyone has the right to a defense, and defense attorneys take that obligation seriously, no matter how serious the charge. The following months were filled with legal maneuvers, pretrial hearings, and preparation. This is a phase not often seen by the public, but absolutely critical to the outcome of the case. The defense filed a series of motions to dismiss the charges, motions to exclude certain evidence, motions to change the venue of the trial. Each of these motions had to be heard by the judge and decided. Some were denied immediately, others required extensive legal arguments and the production of documentation. At the same time, the prosecutor was preparing his case. They organized the evidence into a coherent narrative, prepared witnesses for testimony, and consulted with experts. Forensic specialists were briefed on how to present technical evidence in a way that jurors without a technical background could understand. Jury selection was itself a long process. In cases with extensive media coverage, it is difficult to find jurors who have not heard anything about the case and do not have a preformed opinion. Attorneys for both sides asked dozens of questions of potential jurors, trying to uncover any biases or inability to be impartial. Negotiations about a possible plea agreement and sentence also occurred during this preparation phase. This is a common practice in the American legal system. A defendant may plead guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence or the removal of certain charges. These discussions take place in private, between lawyers and the prosecutor. In February of 2022, a significant turning point came. After months of legal wrangling and negotiations, the decision to plead guilty was made. This is not a decision to be made lightly. It means giving up the right to a trial, giving up the possibility of being found not guilty. The reasons for this decision were probably complex. Perhaps the lawyers explained that the evidence against the defendant was overwhelming and that the jury would almost certainly find guilt. Perhaps the prosecutor offered a plea bargain that guaranteed a certain sentence rather than risking an even worse sentence after trial. Maybe it was a combination of both. The plea hearing was a formal but emotionally charged event. The judge had to confirm that the plea was voluntary, that the defendant understood the consequences, that she was not under duress. These are important legal safeguards. The system must ensure that no one is forced to confess to a crime they did not commit. The defendant had to verbally admit her guilt. It is not enough to just agree to a plea bargain. She must say out loud in court that she committed the crime she is accused of. This is often the most emotional moment of the entire trial. The words are clear, unquestioned, and recorded on the record. The victim's family was present at this hearing. For them, it was a moment of partial closure. Finally, an official acknowledgement of what happened, who is responsible. But at the same time, it was painful to hear the person admit that they had planned the murder of their loved one.
Part of the deal also included an explanation of the details of the crime. The defendant had to describe what she did, how she planned it, what role she played. This narrative provided answers to the questions that plagued the family and the investigators. Each detail was another piece of the puzzle, another confirmation of how deeply thought out this crime was. In exchange for a guilty plea, the sentence was set at life in prison. In the context of the American legal system, that means spending the rest of your life behind bars, without the possibility of parole. This is not a symbolic sentence. It is literally the rest of your life spent in a cell. A life sentence is one of the harshest sentences in a system that does not use the death penalty. It means giving up everything: freedom, privacy, control over your own life. Each day is the same. Each year blends into the next, with no hope of change. For the defendant, it meant never seeing the world outside prison as a free person. She will not celebrate holidays with her family. She will not travel. She will not have a career. She will not have normal relationships. Everything that most people look forward to in life is forever denied to her. The judge, in pronouncing the sentence, spoke of the seriousness of the crime. He mentioned the premeditated nature of the murder, the betrayal of trust, greed as a motive. He explained why a life sentence was appropriate, because the crime was so serious, so reckless, that anything less would not be just. The victim's family had the opportunity to submit a statement about the impact of the crime. This is a common practice in American courts, giving the victim's loved ones the opportunity to speak directly to the court and the defendant about how the crime has affected their lives. These statements are often poignant and painful, describing the loss, the grief, the void left by the crime. They may talk about how their lives have changed, how each day reminds them of what they have lost. They may have described the victim, not as a statistic or a case, but as a person, a son, a brother, a friend. These personal stories remind us that behind every crime are real people with real suffering. While one case was resolved by a guilty plea, the other defendant chose to go a different route. The year 2023 brought a second trial, this time with a full jury trial. This trial was more extensive and complicated. Without a guilty plea, the prosecutor had to present all the evidence, call all the witnesses, build a case from the ground up. The defense had the right to challenge every piece of evidence, to cross-examine every witness, to present its own version of events. Jury selection for this trial was thorough. Lawyers on both sides knew that the composition of the jury could determine the outcome of the case. They looked for people who might be sympathetic to their arguments, who could see the case through their eyes. The opening statements of both sides set the tone for the entire trial. The prosecutor outlined the story of the crime: who, what, when, where, why. They used emotional language, painting a picture of brutal murder and cold-blooded planning. The defense, on the other hand, presented alternative explanations, questioned motives, suggested that things were not as clear as they seemed. Weeks of testimony followed. Forensic experts explained the technical evidence, how mobile data analysis works, how financial records are interpreted, how vehicles are identified from CCTV footage. Each expert was subjected to cross-examination, where the defense tried to find weaknesses in their analysis. Eyewitnesses described what they saw and heard. Their accounts were often emotional. Memories of that day are still vivid, still painful. The defense sought to cast doubt on their memory, to suggest that they might have been mistaken about details. Psychologists and psychiatrists were called to testify about the defendant's mental state. The defense may have tried to argue diminished responsibility because of mental problems. The prosecutor, on the other hand, argued that regardless of mental health, the defendant knew what he was doing and that it was wrong.
The closing arguments were the culmination of everything that was presented. The prosecutor summarized the evidence, connected all the pieces of the puzzle, and asked the jury for a verdict of guilty. The defense emphasized doubts, questioned the interpretation of the evidence, and asked the jury to acquit, or at least find a lesser included offense. After weeks of trial, the moment came when the jury retired to deliberate. This is often the most tense part of the entire trial, waiting for the verdict. No one knows how long it will take. It could be hours or days. The jury must reach a unanimous decision, which means all 12 jurors must agree. When the jury announced it had a verdict, the courtroom filled with tension. The defendant stood, waiting for the words that would change his life. The victim's family held their breath. Reporters prepared their notes. The whole room waited for those decisive words. The jury foreman stood up and read the verdict. Guilty. Guilty of murder. A word that means the end of one life and justice for another. The reactions in the courtroom were immediate. Maybe a cry from the victim's family, maybe a scream, maybe silent tears of relief.
But the guilty verdict is only the first part. The sentencing phase followed. In some cases, the jury decides the sentence, in others, the judge. They must consider the seriousness of the crime, the circumstances, the defendant's past history, the possibility of rehabilitation. The sentence was pronounced, 62 years in prison. That's effectively a life sentence for most people. 62 years means that even if the defendant was young at the time of the crime, he would be very old or dead by the time he could be released. This sentence sends a clear message. Society will not tolerate murder for hire. It will not tolerate betrayal, manipulation, and violence for financial gain. The punishment must fit the crime, and in this case the crime was so serious that it required one of the harshest possible sentences. Both sentences were final and not subject to appeal in the ordinary sense. When someone pleads guilty as part of a plea bargain, they usually waive their right to appeal. When someone is convicted by a jury, they can appeal, but successful appeals are rare. You have to show legal error during the trial, not just disagree with the verdict. For the legal system, this case has been closed. Justice has been served in the sense that the guilty have been identified, tried, and convicted. The process worked as it should. The evidence was gathered, presented, evaluated, and a verdict was rendered. For the victim's family, it provided a kind of closure, even if the pain never completely goes away. They know that the people responsible for their loved one's death will be held accountable for their actions. It doesn't bring the victim back, but it does provide a sense that justice has been served. For society as a whole, these verdicts confirm that even carefully planned crimes can be discovered and punished, that modern investigative methods and the legal system can work together to achieve justice, even if it takes time and enormous effort. Both convicts now face the reality of life in prison, years and decades behind bars, with plenty of time to reflect on the decisions that got them there. This is their punishment, their reality, their future. And while they sit in their cells, the victim's family and friends are trying to rebuild their lives, to live on, to remember the person they lost. Now we come to the part of this story that is perhaps most shocking. Imagine donating money to someone who has just lost a loved one, thinking you're helping in a difficult time, and then finding out that the whole situation was a lie and your money was used for something completely different. Let's go through how the trust of thousands of people has been violated. Shortly after the tragic event, an online fundraising campaign was set up on the GoFundMe platform.
This platform is one of the most popular for personal fundraising in America. People use it for everything from medical expenses to funeral costs to helping disaster victims.
The campaign was presented to help a widow who had just lost her husband to a violent death. The description was emotional and moving. It told the story of tragic loss, sudden widowhood, and the financial difficulties that follow the loss of the main breadwinner. It was the type of story that touches people's hearts and motivates them to open their wallets. The photos on the campaign likely showed happy moments from the past. Family photos, smiles, moments of joy that will never be again. These visuals are powerful. They remind donors that behind every number is a real person with a real life and a real loss. The campaign text was carefully written. It mentioned specific needs, funeral expenses, which can be astronomical in America. It talked about the loss of income, the need to cover the mortgage, the bills, the daily living expenses. He explained how the sudden loss of a partner can devastate a family financially, especially if they were not prepared for such a tragedy. The campaign was also shared on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Posts pleading for help for the unfortunate widow appeared everywhere. Friends shared, then friends of friends, then complete strangers. The viral nature of social media means that such a campaign can reach thousands or tens of thousands of people in a matter of days. The local community mobilized immediately. Neighbors, work colleagues, church members, everyone wanted to help. It's a natural human instinct. When someone in our community is suffering, we want to do something to ease their pain. And in modern times, helping often means sending money through an online platform. The response has been overwhelming. Money started coming in almost immediately. $10 here, $50 there. Someone donated $100. Someone donated $500. Each donation was accompanied by a message of support, a condolence, a wish for strength. These messages showed the real compassion and kindness of the people. Within days, the campaign exceeded tens of thousands of dollars. Within a week, it was even more. People watched the number grow and felt good about being part of something bigger, a collective effort to help someone in need. The comments below the campaign were filled with compassion. "We're praying for you. Stay strong. No one should have to go through this alone." In the end, the total amount raised exceeded $100,000. That's no small sum. It's more than most Americans earn in 2 years. It represents donations from hundreds, perhaps thousands, of individual donors. Each of these people believed they were doing something good, helping someone in real need. What made this campaign so successful was its timing and its story. It came at a time when the tragedy was still fresh, when emotions were running high. The media coverage drew attention to the case, which meant more people knew about the campaign. And the story was perfectly timed. A widow in a desperate situation, a community coming together to help. Donors came from all over the United States, not just the local area. Some may have lost a partner themselves and felt connected to the story. Others may never have experienced such a loss, but could imagine the pain and wanted to help. Motivations varied, but the result was the same. Money flowed into the campaign. GoFundMe campaigns also have an element of social proof. When people see that hundreds of others have already donated, they feel more inclined to contribute as well. It's a psychological phenomenon. If so many people believe it's a credible cause, it must be true, right? The platform also makes it easier to donate. A few clicks, entering your credit card information, and you're done. No need to fill out complicated forms or send checks. This simplicity contributes to why online fundraising campaigns are so successful. They have lowered the barrier between the intent to donate and the actual donation. Now comes the ugly part. While thousands of people believed their money was helping a widow cover funeral expenses and living costs, the reality was quite different. The money was not used for what it was intended for. Instead, it was used in a way that is absolutely shocking and disgusting. Some of the money was used to buy gifts. But not gifts for family or children. Not gifts that had anything to do with grieving or rebuilding lives. They were gifts for a specific person. The person who was involved in the whole crime. Imagine the audacity. Using money that people donated out of kindness for gifts for someone who helped commit murder. These gifts weren't small attentions. They weren't second-hand or cheap items. They were high-quality, expensive items. Maybe electronics, maybe clothes, maybe something personal and intimate. Each gift represented money that someone had worked hard for and decided to give out of the goodness of their heart. Another portion of the money went to personal expenses that had absolutely nothing to do with the stated purpose of the campaign. Maybe it was fancy dinners at expensive restaurants. Maybe it was shopping for clothes or jewelry. Maybe it was trips or entertainment. All things you normally pay for with your own money, not with money donated for funeral expenses. Bank statements probably showed transactions at stores that had nothing to do with grieving or financial hardship. Purchases at luxury goods stores. Payments for services that are not necessary. Expenses that show a lifestyle of comfort rather than want. Some of the money may have gone to legal expenses later when the investigation began. Lawyers aren't cheap, especially in murder cases. The irony is that the people who donated to help were unknowingly funding the legal defense of a person accused of murder. Perhaps the money was also used for communication devices, phones, computers, services that allowed coordination between the conspirators. Every dollar donated in good faith was potentially used to further criminal activity. What's perhaps worst about this is the absolute lack of conscience. To use money donated for the funeral of a person you had murdered to buy gifts for his murderer, that requires a level of moral bankruptcy that is hard to fathom. This is not just financial fraud, it is also a deeply emotional betrayal of thousands of people who acted out of kindness. As the investigation progressed and the truth came out, donors began to learn what really happened to their money. This revelation likely came through the media, which reported on the details of the case, including the abuses of the fundraising campaign. The reaction was immediate and intense. People felt betrayal at the deepest level. They were not just deceived. Their kindness was abused. Their good faith was abused. Their compassion was abused. For many people, it was a traumatic experience that shook their faith in humanity and in charitable giving. Social media exploded with comments from angry donors. People wrote about how they felt betrayed, how they regretted donating, how it changed their approach to helping others. Some comments were filled with anger, others with sadness, others with disbelief. But all shared the feeling that they were deeply disappointed. Some donors talked about their own financial situations. Perhaps they donated money they could not afford themselves because they were so moved by the story. Maybe it was money they were saving for something important, but decided to give to someone who needed it more. To find out that these sacrifices were unnecessary and based on lies was devastating. Discussions began to emerge about how to avoid such fraud in the future. People asked how they could verify the legitimacy of fundraising campaigns, how they could know that their money was really going where it was supposed to. This conversation was important, but also sad. It reflects a loss of innocence and trust in charitable platforms. Misusing fundraising money is not just morally wrong, it's also a criminal offense. Fraud, embezzlement, false representation, all of these legal categories could apply to the situation. The prosecutor probably included it in the overall charges. Donors began to consider legal action. Some contacted attorneys to see if they could sue to get their money back. Class action lawsuits are common in mass fraud cases where many people have suffered similar harm from the same person. GoFundMe as a platform has also faced questions. What are their mechanisms for verifying campaigns? How do they protect donors from fraud? What happens when a campaign is found to be fraudulent? The platform has policies for these situations. but implementation can be complicated, especially when money has already been raised and spent. There were also questions about the tax implications. Donations on GoFundMe are typically considered personal gifts, which are neither tax-deductible for the donor nor taxable for the recipient. But when money is fraudulently obtained, the whole tax situation gets complicated. Media pressure to investigate the fund has been intense. Journalists wrote articles about exactly where the money went, producing detailed breakdowns of expenses. This public scrutiny added another layer of shame and scandal to an already shocking case. The case had a wider impact on charitable giving in general. When people feel deceived once, they become more cautious, perhaps too cautious. This can damage legitimate fundraising campaigns that really need help. Studies have shown that there is a decline in giving after major charity scandals. People become skeptical, less willing to believe stories even if they are true. This creates a cruel irony. Not only are the scammers taking money from those who trust them, they are also damaging the ability of the truly needy to get help. For many donors in this case, it was a lesson in due diligence. They learned the hard way that even stories that look convincing can be lies, that media coverage does not guarantee legitimacy, that you need to ask questions, check facts, be careful, even if it means refraining from an immediate emotional reaction. Platforms like GoFundMe have also had to rethink their processes. How can they better protect donors? How can they identify fraudulent campaigns more quickly? How can they refund money when fraud is detected? These questions are complex and have no easy answers. It was a moment of reflection for the community as a whole, a discussion about the balance between the willingness to help and the need to be cautious, about how we maintain our humanity and willingness to help, while also protecting ourselves from those who would take advantage of our kindness. This aspect of the case, the misuse of the charity collection, added another layer of betrayal and deceit to an already tragic story. This was not just about the murder of one person, but the violation of the trust of thousands. Every dollar donated represented an act of faith in human decency, and that faith was betrayed in the worst possible way. This case has become one of the most watched crime stories in the American media. Let's go over how the media handled this case and what impact their coverage had on the public's perception of similar crimes. The 48 Hours program on CBS was one of the first to pick up this story. This show is legendary in the American television landscape. It has been around for decades and specializes in in-depth reporting on real crime cases. Their episode devoted to this case was masterfully told, emphasizing the human aspect of the tragedy. The producers of 48 Hours spent months preparing the episode. They interviewed investigators who were willing to talk about the case. They visited the scene, filmed footage of the neighborhood where the tragedy took place. Their cameraman captured the atmosphere of the place. Quiet streets, ordinary houses, a place where no one would expect such horror. The show used reenactments of the events with actors, a common practice in true crime documentaries. These reenactments help viewers visualize what happened, even if the actual footage doesn't exist or can't be shown. The lighting, the camera work, the music, everything was designed to create tension and emotional impact. Dateline NBC followed with its own take on the story. This show has a slightly different style than 48 Hours. It focuses more on the investigative aspect, on how the case was solved. Their reporters are known for asking tough questions and stopping at nothing to get answers. Dateline's episode featured exclusive interviews with people who knew the people involved. Neighbors described what a normal day was like in their neighborhood before the tragedy. Work colleagues talked about the character of various characters in the drama. These personal perspectives added depth to a story that might otherwise have been just a collection of facts and dates. CBS News and ABC News produced their own specials and segments. Their morning shows and evening newscasts devoted considerable time to the case. Anchor personalities like David Muir and Norah O'Donnell presented the story with the gravitas and empathy it deserved. These networks had access to legal experts who analyzed the case from different angles. Former prosecutors discussed prosecution strategy. Defense attorneys talked about the challenges of the defense. Forensic psychologists analyzed the motivations and mental states of those involved. These expert comments helped the audience understand the complexity of the case. The visual presentation was carefully crafted. Graphs showed the timeline of events, maps depicted the movements of the suspects, and diagrams explained the complex technical evidence. Television is a visual medium, and these programs took full advantage of that to make complex information understandable. Music and sound effects played an important role in creating atmosphere. Dark, tense music during descriptions of the crime, quiet, melancholic music during the memories of the victim, dramatic music during the revelation of key evidence. All of these elements combined to create an emotional experience for the audience. Casefile is one of the most respected true crime podcasts in the world. Its anonymous Australian host is known for his calm, matter-of-fact style of storytelling that lets the story speak for itself without unnecessary dramatization. When he decided to devote episodes to this case, listeners knew they would get an in-depth analysis. Casefile typically breaks complex cases into multiple parts, allowing each aspect of the story to be given its due attention.
The first episode could start by introducing all the characters, who they were, what their lives were like, how their paths intersected. This slow building of context is something that the audio format allows for better than the time-limited TV format. The second episode probably focused on the crime itself and the subsequent investigation. The presenter would describe the events in detail, quoting from police reports, court documents, newspaper articles. His meticulous research is legendary. Casefile listeners know that every fact has been verified by multiple sources. The third episode would deal with the trial and the aftermath. Here the moderator would analyze the legal aspects, explain the intricacies of the American legal system to an international audience. Casefile has listeners around the world, and discuss the broader implications of the case. The audio format has unique advantages. Listeners can consume content during commutes, workouts, homework. This accessibility has contributed to the immense popularity of true crime podcasts. People can immerse themselves in complex stories in a way that fits their lifestyle. Casefile also doesn't insert commercials into the middle of the story, which maintains suspense and respect for the seriousness of the subject matter. This decision differentiates quality true crime content from that which merely capitalizes on human tragedy for profit. Other podcasts have also covered the case, each with their own point of view. Some focused on the psychological aspects, what drives a person to plan the murder of a partner. Others discussed the forensic science that helped solve the case. Still others examined the social factors that may have played a role. The true crime listening community is active and engaged. Discussion boards and subreddits devoted to the case have exploded with activity. People shared theories, discussed evidence, and expressed opinions about the fairness of convictions. This community dimension added another layer to the media coverage. Local news stations in Dallas covered the case extensively from day one. For local journalists, this was not just another story. It was a tragedy in their community. Reporters were on the scene during the investigation, reporting live from the scene, following every development. The local newspaper published a series of articles that dug deeper than the daily news coverage. Investigative reporters spent weeks talking to people, going through public records, connecting the dots. Their work often revealed details that the police hadn't yet published. National news sites like CNN, Fox News, MSNBC all covered the case. Their online stories included ongoing updates as the case developed. Every arrest, every court hearing, every new piece of evidence was immediately reported and analyzed. Social media played a huge role in spreading the word. Twitter exploded with discussion every time new information came out. Facebook groups dedicated to true crime shared articles and discussed details.
Instagram accounts dedicated to true crime cases created infographics and timelines. This immediacy of modern news coverage means that the public is following cases in real time, in a way that wasn't possible in previous decades. People are not just passive consumers of news, they are active participants in the discussion of the case. Public reaction has been intense and multifaceted. People have been shocked, fascinated, horrified. Comments under articles and videos numbered in the thousands. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone wanted to express their feelings about what had happened. Many expressed deep sympathy for the victim and his family. Comments like, "My heart is broken for his family," or "No one deserves to die like this," were common. This collective empathy shows the best side of human nature, the ability to feel the pain of others. Others expressed disbelief and shock at the level of betrayal. How can anyone do this to the person they supposedly love? Was a common question. This aspect of the case, intimate betrayal, resonated with people on a deep level because it touched on our most basic needs for trust and security in relationships. There were also discussions about gender dynamics. Some feminist commentators pointed out how women can be just as capable of violence as men, an important conversation in an era when discourse about domestic violence often assumes male perpetrators and female victims. Psychologists and therapists used the case as a teaching moment. They wrote articles about warning signs in relationships, how to recognize manipulative behavior, and the importance of paying attention to intuition. This educational aspect of the media coverage had the potential to save lives by helping people recognize dangerous situations. The true crime community was particularly active. These fans of true crime stories analyzed every detail, created their own theories, and discussed legal nuances. For some, it's a hobby. For others, it's a way to cope with their own traumas or fears. The case has become part of a larger cultural conversation about relationships, trust, and violence. It has been cited in articles about modern relationships, about the dangers of online dating, when people have met or reconnected online, about the importance of really knowing the person you are with. Discussions about social media and its role in modern crimes have also escalated. How does digital communication enable conspiracies? How does technology simultaneously facilitate the crime and its solution? These questions are relevant in the digital age. The case also contributed to the debate about fundraising platforms and their accountability. Should GoFundMe and similar sites have stricter verification processes? How to balance quick help for those who really need it with protecting donors from fraud? These questions remain relevant. Legal experts used the case as an example of how modern forensic technology has changed criminal investigations. Law school lectures could use the case as a study of how digital evidence can solve cases that might have gone unsolved 20 years ago. The psychological aspects of the case fascinated experts. How can someone live with someone, plan their death, and still maintain a facade of normalcy? What goes on in the brain of someone capable of such dissociation? These questions have led to academic research and publications. Even years after the case, interest remains. The anniversary of the crime brings new articles that reassess the case in hindsight. Where Are They Now? Articles trace what happened to the various people involved in the case. Documentaries and longer formats continue to explore the case from new angles. There may be new interviews with people who were previously unwilling to talk. New evidence or details may emerge that were not originally disclosed. Journalism and criminology students are studying this case as an example of different aspects of their disciplines. It's a case that has it all: interesting characters, a complex investigation, a dramatic trial, an ethical dilemma about media coverage. This sustained interest shows how certain cases become part of the collective memory. They are not just statistics in police reports. They are stories that resonate, that teach us something about human nature, about justice, about society. The media coverage of this case has been extensive, multifaceted, and has had a profound impact on how the public perceives such crimes. It has shown the power of the media to both inform and shape public discourse. And it reminded us all that behind every headline is a real human story with real consequences. And here we are, at the end of this incredibly dark story. But before we say goodbye, I want to talk about what we can take away from this case. Because every story, even the most tragic, can teach us something. Let's reflect together on the lessons this case leaves us with. Looking at this case from a distance, one of the most frightening things is how easily a person can be manipulated. Manipulation is not just something we see in movies or read about in books. It is a real danger that can affect any of us. Manipulators have specific characteristics that make them dangerous. They can identify vulnerabilities in other people, emotional wounds, loneliness, the need to be needed, the desire for connection. Once they find these vulnerabilities, they begin to systematically exploit them to achieve their goals. What is particularly frightening is that manipulation often starts subtly. It's not that someone comes along and says, "I want to manipulate you." It starts with small things: compliments, attention, the feeling that someone finally understands. But gradually it turns into control, isolation, and eventually demands that one would never normally meet. Lies are the basic tool of the manipulator, but they are not just simple lies. They are sophisticated stories, often containing grains of truth that make them more believable. A manipulator can mix real events with fabricated details to create a narrative that is hard to dispute. Emotional blackmail is another powerful tactic. "If you really love me, you'll do this. No one else would do this for me, but you're special. I'm in danger, and you're the only one who can help me." These phrases create a sense of duty, guilt, and responsibility that can make people do things against their better judgment. Isolation is a key strategy. The manipulator tries to cut the victim off from friends, family, and support systems. They do this in stages, first planting seeds of doubt about other people, then creating situations where it is difficult to maintain these relationships. Eventually, the victim ends up depending solely on the manipulator. Gaslighting is a technique where the manipulator forces the victim to question their own perception of reality. "That never happened. You're exaggerating. You're too sensitive." Over time, this causes the victim to lose confidence in their own judgment and become even more dependent on the manipulator for the definition of reality. The lesson here is clear. We must maintain critical thinking, even when dealing with people we like. If someone asks for something that feels wrong, it probably is wrong. Our intuition exists for a reason. It's an evolutionary tool for detecting danger. When something tells us something is wrong, we should listen. It's also important to maintain independent relationships and support systems. Having friends and family to talk to about our relationships who can provide an outside perspective. Isolation is a breeding ground for manipulation. Community is protection. This case is a fascinating example of how far forensic science has advanced and how it is now almost impossible to commit the perfect crime. We live in an age where our every move leaves a digital footprint, and this reality has profound implications for crime. Mobile phones today are like the black boxes of our lives. They record where we have been through GPS and the triangulation of cell towers. They store every message, every call, every internet search. Even if we delete something, it can often be recovered by forensic experts. This technology has proven to be groundbreaking in countless cases. Security cameras are everywhere. In stores, on houses, at intersections, in banks, even on doorbells. This ubiquity of cameras means that your movements are likely to be recorded, even if you are unaware of it. For criminals, it means it's almost impossible to move without leaving a visual trail. Financial transactions are also easy to track. Every credit card payment, every bank transfer, every ATM withdrawal. Everything leaves a record. Forensic accountants can trace the flow of money in a way that reveals patterns and connections that would otherwise remain hidden. DNA technology has advanced to the point where even a tiny amount of biological material can identify a person. Hair, skin, blood, saliva, it can all be analyzed. DNA databases allow comparisons with millions of samples, meaning that even old unsolved cases can suddenly be solved. Ironically, digital communication is both private and public. While people may feel that their private messages are indeed private, the reality is that they are stored on servers and can be retrieved by court orders. Nothing you write digitally is truly temporary or private. Metadata, data about data, is often more important than the content itself. When a message was sent, from where, how long it took to write, what the frequency of communication was, all of this information creates a picture of behavior and relationships. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are now helping to analyze vast amounts of data faster than ever before. Algorithms can identify patterns that human investigators might miss. They can comb through thousands of hours of video footage to find relevant moments. The lesson here is twofold. For potential criminals, we live in a time when it is almost impossible not to leave clues. Technology will catch up with you. For ordinary citizens, this technology, while it may raise privacy concerns, is a powerful tool for justice. It helps protect the innocent and convict the guilty. It is also important to remember that this technology works best when used by qualified professionals. Investigators need to know what to look for, how to interpret the data, how to connect different pieces of evidence. Technology is a tool, but human intelligence and intuition remain critical. One of the most painful lessons from this case concerns the misuse of human kindness. When we donate money to someone in need, we do so with the best of intentions. But this case reminds us that not all requests for help are legitimate. Critical thinking does not mean being cynical or distrustful. It means being informed and cautious. We can be kind and smart at the same time. In fact, we have a responsibility to be both. Our kindness should be directed where it will actually help. When considering a donation to an online fundraising campaign, it's important to ask questions. Who created the campaign? Can you verify their identity? Is the story corroborated by independent sources such as news articles or police reports? Are there warning signs, such as a lack of specific details or exaggerated emotional appeals? Research is key. In today's digital age, you can often find information about a person or situation through a simple internet search. Social media can provide context. Local news coverage can confirm events. This research only takes a few minutes, but it can save you from being taken advantage of.
Platforms like GoFundMe have mechanisms for reporting suspicious campaigns. If something looks suspicious, don't hesitate to report it. The platform has teams that investigate these reports and can suspend campaigns that violate their terms. An alternative to donating to individuals is to donate to established charities. These organizations have processes for verifying need and distributing aid. They also have oversight and accountability that individual fundraising campaigns often do not. If you choose to donate, keep track of how the money is used. Some platforms provide updates from recipients. If money is being used in a way that is not consistent with its original purpose, you can report it. It's also important to be aware of the tax implications. In many countries, donations to registered charities are tax-deductible, while personal donations are not.
This is another reason to consider donating through established organizations. Education is key. Talk to your friends and family about these issues. Share stories about fraudulent campaigns. The more people are informed, the harder it is for scammers to succeed. Remember that the vast majority of fundraising campaigns are legitimate. People genuinely need help, and online platforms have enabled incredible generosity and support. The goal is not to stop helping. The goal is to help smartly. This case makes us think about a fundamental question. How can we trust the people we love when even those closest to us can betray us? It is a frightening question that goes to the heart of human existence. Trust is the foundation of every healthy relationship. Without trust, we cannot have true intimacy, true connection. But trust also makes us vulnerable. When we trust someone, we give them the power to hurt us. And as this case shows, some people abuse that power in the worst possible way. The answer is not to stop trusting. That would mean living a life of isolation and fear, which is no life at all. The answer is to learn to recognize the warning signs, to maintain healthy boundaries, and to trust gradually, not blindly. Healthy relationships are built on mutuality. Both partners give and take. If you find that you are always the one giving, the one accommodating, the one giving in, that's a warning sign. Love should be balanced, not one-sided. Transparency is also important. In a healthy relationship, there should not be much secrecy. That doesn't mean you have to share every thought or detail, but the basic aspects of your life, where you are, who you're with, what you're doing, should be open. Respect for your other relationships is essential. A partner who supports you in maintaining friendships and family ties is a healthy partner. One who tries to isolate you from others is raising alarm bells. Consistency between words and actions is critical. People can say anything to you, but their true values and intentions are reflected in their behavior. If someone says they love you but treats you badly, believe the behavior, not the words. Looking back on this story, I am amazed at the complexity of human nature. We are capable of incredible kindness, thousands of people who have donated money to a stranger in need. But we are also capable of incredible cruelty, planning the death of a person who trusts you. This case reminds us that evil often doesn't come in the form we expect. It's not always a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes it's a person you know, a person you trust, a person you share your life with. This knowledge is frightening, but also important. Justice has been served in this case. The perpetrators have been identified, tried, and convicted. The system worked. But no amount of justice can bring back the lives lost. No amount of punishment can fill the void left in the hearts of those who loved the victim. For those of us watching these stories from a distance, it is important to remember that there are real people behind each case. Real pain, real loss, real lives changed forever. True crime isn't just entertainment. It's a window into the darkest aspects of human nature. But we can learn from these stories. We can become more vigilant, smarter, kinder, but more careful. We can support systems that protect the vulnerable and bring criminals to justice. We can build communities where people are less isolated and therefore less vulnerable to manipulation. Thank you for sticking with me to the end of this difficult story. I know it wasn't easy to listen to. It wasn't even easy to tell. But I believe these stories have value. They remind us of the fragility of life, the importance of justice, and the complexity of human nature. If this story has taught you anything, I hope it is to be vigilant, but not paranoid, to be kind, but not naive, to trust, but to verify, and above all,
to value the people in your life because you never know when they might be taken. Don't forget to subscribe if you're interested in similar stories. Give a like if you liked the video, and write in the comments what you think about this case. I'm interested in your opinion. And remember, be safe, be careful, and be kind to yourself and others. See you in the next video. Have a great day.